Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video in this new series. If you're like me, you probably love sheet music and scores, and you enjoy getting a new score, opening it for the first time, and exploring a new piece of music, or maybe getting to know an old favorite. But what you probably don't like is not knowing what kind of score you're getting. There's lots of scores out there, especially for classical works, and it's not always clear which score is the best or most appropriate for any given application. So hopefully this video can shed some light onto your next score purchase. Without further ado, let's begin. So as you can see, we have 3 volumes here today, and for size comparison, we have a standard Sharpie. Now the top book is a companion piece to add context to score study and analysis. We won't be going through that one on camera today. Next, we have a vocal piano score to Mahler's 8th Symphony. As you can see, it's a fairly nice size. The print is maybe a little bit small, but not smaller than many scores that I personally have used in rehearsal and even in performance. There's nice spacing between the staves. The print is very legible and clear. As you can see, the choral and vocal texts are only in the original language, not with an English translation, which, depending on your purposes, may or may not be advantageous. I personally prefer this. So again, at times, some of the notation does get a little bit small, but not terribly so. It's worth noting that the tempo and some of the rehearsal markings are not in English, which, depending on your fluency, may be problematic. But I don't believe this should be a problem for most performers. The paper is not terribly thin. It's not very thick, but it's certainly a usable score. Not much front or end material. All in all, I think a perfectly usable score for rehearsal and performance purposes. Next, we have the full score. Now, I believe this is a Dover score, a reprint of an earlier edition, and I will provide a link to the purchase for both scores in the description. The cover advertises this as lay flat binding. I'm not sure that I would quite call it that, but I'm sure that it will flatten out with use as you break the spine in, and even just opening it for the first time, it seems to be perfectly usable, definitely for score study at the very least. We begin with a complete translation of the text as well as a glossary of the German terms that are used throughout the score, both of which are very useful for preparation and score study purposes. And without much ado, we then go straight into the music itself. As for the layout, I think that this is certainly a nice size volume to work with. The print is somewhat small, but given the number of instruments that are on the page, I don't think it's unreasonably so. There isn't a huge amount of room for notation in between the staves, but I think that there is enough room to be able to use the score and look over it comfortably. When all the instruments are in play, or many of the instruments are in play, it does start to get rather small, though. The paper, again, is of good quality, a little bit thin, but not overly so. There we see just how tight some of the score can get, bordering on not necessarily illegible, but certainly difficult to look at a glance. However, if you are familiar with the score or if you have time to study the score in depth, this should not be a problem for most musicians. This page does look a little bit less well printed than the others. The lines are not quite as clear and sometimes breaking up. I don't know if this is a byproduct of the engraving or of the copying of an earlier engraving. But something to look out for. It doesn't seem to be a prevalent issue, but it does occur occasionally in this volume. Again, we see at times the printing can get quite small and is not necessarily as well set on the page as it was in earlier parts of the score we looked at. And again, the score ends without much ado, concluding the music and then leaving it off. Overall, I would say this is a nice, perfectly usable score, definitely good for score study, very affordable for what it is, and that is about that. Again, I will provide the links to both in the description below, and I hope this was helpful. Have a good day.